The room that wasn't on the floor plan. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories, but after what I experienced at the Grand Oaks Hotel, I'm not so sure anymore. It started with a door that shouldn't have existed. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a break from the usual grind. I'd heard great things about the Grand Oaks, an old but well-regarded luxury hotel tucked away in the city's historic district. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I felt the weight of its age. Polished wood floors, antique furniture, and faint traces of dust clung to the velvet curtains. It felt like I was walking through a forgotten era, but I didn't mind. The charm of it was part of the appeal. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, handed me a key. "Room 418. Enjoy your stay," she said. There was something in her voice, something flat, almost rehearsed, but I shook it off as the usual hotel pleasantries. The room was on the 4th floor, tucked away at the end of a long hallway, its door marked with a simple brass number. When I entered, I was greeted by an overwhelming sense of quiet. The room was spacious, but something about it felt off, stale air, too still. I shrugged it off and unpacked, deciding to go for a walk to clear my mind. It wasn't until later, as I settled into bed, that I noticed it. The door. It was at the far end of the room, near the window just past the large antique wardrobe. At first, I thought it might be a closet or some kind of maintenance access, but then I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was no doorknob, no keyhole, just an unmarked, faded wooden panel with a faint line running down its center. I got up to investigate. The air around it felt cold, like a draft was seeping through the cracks. My curiosity piqued. I pressed my palm against the wood. It was strangely cold to the touch, as though the room behind it had been sealed off for years. The line in the wood seemed to beckon me. I ran my fingers along it, and to my shock, the door creaked open with a soft, unsettling noise. Behind it was a narrow hallway, barely wide enough for me to step into. The air smelled damp, like old stone, and the faintest echo of a far-off drip seemed to echo through the walls. There was no light source, but I could make out the shape of the walls moldy, cracked, as though this part of the building had been forgotten by time itself. I hesitated. A part of me knew I should just close the door and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part, a darker part, urged me forward. The hallway seemed to stretch on in the dim light of my phone screen, and my footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence. My heart was racing now. What was I even doing here? This wasn't part of the hotel. As I moved further down, I felt the temperature drop even more. A chill crawled under my skin, and I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. I was on the verge of turning back when I noticed something strange at the end of the hall. A faint light, soft, yellow, flickering. I moved toward it without thinking, almost compelled. The hallway opened into a large, dusty room. It looked like it might have been an old storage area, old furniture, stacked carelessly in the corners, boxes long forgotten, the air thick with dust. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the footprints. Small, uneven, dust-covered prints led from the doorway to the far corner of the room, where a single chair sat. They were fresh. I stepped closer to the chair, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and found a strange set of clothes hanging on the back of it. An old, worn jacket, faded jeans, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. But there was something about them, the way they were arranged, the way they hung almost too neatly. As I reached out to touch them, I froze. A soft sound of rustle came from behind me. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my chest, but the room was empty. Just then, the light flickered once more, and I noticed a small door to the side of the room. Barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it. It was ajar. I was paralyzed. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was rooted to the spot. Slowly, I took a step toward the door, each movement feeling like it was being pulled from me against my will. As I reached the door, I pushed it open with trembling hands. Behind it was a small, dark closet, but what caught my eye was the wall beside it, covered in old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Most were too faded to read, but some had been taped over others. As I drew closer, one headline became legible: Mysterious Disappearance of Hotel Guest, Room 418, Never Found. My blood ran cold. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, and in that moment, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just a forgotten part of the hotel. Someone had been living here, hiding, and the door I had just opened wasn't meant to be found. I bolted back toward the hallway, but as I passed the doorway I had come through, I froze. The door was gone. There was no doorway, no dark hall, nothing but the blank wall where it had been. I ran back to my room, my mind a whirlwind of panic, but the moment I stepped inside, the air felt normal again. Everything was just as it had been. I never told anyone about the room or the door. Who would believe me? But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something faint, something barely audible, coming from the walls. Footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate steps. I haven't stayed at the Grand Oaks since, but sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those footsteps. And I know, deep down, that I wasn't the first to find that room. And I won't be the last. The whispers were soft at first, so faint, I thought they might be the wind, but then they started calling my name. It was late autumn when I decided to take a solo trip to get away from everything. I needed a break from the city, from the noise, the constant buzz of life that never seemed to stop. So I booked a room at a small remote hotel that I found online, the kind that was tucked away in the middle of nowhere. The website claimed it was a charming, rustic retreat that promised peace and solitude. Honestly, I thought it would be the perfect place to unwind. The hotel was older than I expected, and there was a definite air of neglect. The lobby smelled faintly of wood and dust. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to the reception desk. The receptionist, an elderly man with a raspy voice, handed me the key to room 217. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his smile a little too tight, his eyes a little too distant. I didn't think much of it at the time, brushing it off as just an old man with a weathered soul. I didn't expect much from the room either. It was small but clean enough. The bed was made with mismatched blankets, and the walls were adorned with fading wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been changed in years. But it had a certain charm in an eerie sort of way. I unpacked and decided to head to bed early. I'd been driving for hours and was exhausted. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I felt the deep silence of the hotel settle around me. There was no sound, no cars driving by, no distant chatter from the city, just absolute quiet. It was almost unnerving. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound barely audible at first. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was the wind or the building settling. But then it came again, a soft, barely discernible murmur. I sat up, straining to listen. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. It was something ... someone. The whispering seemed to come from the walls, faint but distinct. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable soft, urgent, almost as if someone was trying to communicate with me without making a sound. I told myself I was imagining it. I was tired, stressed from the drive. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, the sudden light a harsh contrast to the darkness of the room. But the whispers didn't stop. They continued, like voices carried on the wind, slithering through the cracks of the walls. It felt as though they were getting closer, circling around me, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but there was something about the rhythm of their whispers that chilled me. It felt personal, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was the house creaking or the wind getting trapped in the old pipes. But then the whispering stopped for a moment, and I heard something else, a soft scratching sound, like fingernails gently dragging against the wall behind my head. My heart began to race. I wanted to get up, leave the room, but my legs felt heavy. I stayed still, barely breathing, afraid to make a sound. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. And then came a whisper, louder this time, unmistakable. "Come closer." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold shiver run through me. That was no breeze. That was no old building settling. Something was in this room with me. Something was trying to reach me. I scrambled out of bed and stumbled toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, the whispers returned, louder now, as if they were all around me. "Don't go." I stopped in my tracks, my hand still hovering over the door. The whispering was no longer distant. It was right next to me, inside my head, pulling me back into the room. I had to leave. One had to get out of there. With trembling hands, I threw open the door and rushed into the hallway. My mind was spinning, but all I could think was that I had to get away from the room, away from the whispers. I sprinted down the dimly lit corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. But the farther I got from room 217, the more I felt the weight of the hotel pressing down on me. I turned the corner and froze. At the end of the hallway stood the elderly man from the front desk, his eyes dark, his smile wide, unnatural. He didn't say a word, but his gaze followed me as I backed away. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was outside, gulping in the cold night air. I didn't go back inside the hotel. I couldn't. I don't know what was in that room or what it wanted from me, but I know that the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, whispered my name again and again until I reached the car. When I drove away, the only sound was the hum of the engine. But even now, when I lie in bed at night, I still hear them, faint but clear. "Come back." There was someone in the hotel that shouldn't have been there, and no one else seemed to notice. It was supposed to be a relaxing night. I had spent the day on a long road trip, and after hours of driving, I was eager to rest. I had booked a room at a small, somewhat outdated hotel just outside of a quiet town. The kind of place you might miss if you weren't looking for it. Old brick exterior, faded sign hanging by the front door. It was cheap and simple, nothing fancy, but at that point, I didn't care. I checked in around 9 p.m. and was given the key to room 312. The lobby was empty, except for the receptionist, a middle-aged woman who smiled too brightly, but didn't say much beyond handing me the key. The whole place felt a little off, but I couldn't place why. My room was quiet and clean enough, though I noticed a musty smell hanging in the air, like the building hadn't been properly aired out in a long time. The walls creaked as I moved around, and the bed wasn't the most comfortable, but it would do. I unpacked my things and decided to stretch my legs with a quick walk around the hotel. As I wandered down the hallway, I noticed how eerily quiet the place was. No sounds of televisions or people talking. No laughter or music drifting through the walls. Just silence, like the whole hotel had been abandoned. I figured most of the guests were probably asleep by now, but it still felt unsettling. I turned a corner toward the end of the hall when I saw him standing at the far end of the corridor. A man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that looked out of place for the warm weather outside. His face was obscured by the dim light of a flickering hallway lamp, but there was something about him that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't seem to belong. He was just standing there, staring ahead. No movement, no sign that he was aware of me, but he was undeniably there. I froze, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to walk past him, to just act like everything was fine. But something in the back of my mind told me that he didn't belong here, that he shouldn't be in the hotel at all. I decided to approach him. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty hallway. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. He didn't even move. I stepped closer, my heartbeat pounding in my chest now. As I neared him, I noticed something strange. The hallway was completely silent. No echo of footsteps, no sound of anything at all. When I was just a few feet away, I finally saw his face. His expression was blank, empty, like he was lost or in a trance. His skin was pale, and his eyes were so wide open, they almost seemed unnatural. But what was worse than his appearance was the feeling that hit me. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that made me want to run, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. I opened my mouth to speak again, but before I could, the man's head slowly turned to the side toward me. Without warning, he stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. I stood there, my mind racing, feeling an overwhelming urge to turn back. But I forced myself to walk toward the spot where I'd last seen him. I was almost shaking now. There was nothing. No trace of the man. No footsteps. No sign of him whatsoever. I hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me and trying to shake off the creeping unease that had settled over me. I figured maybe I had imagined it or that I was just exhausted. But that didn't explain what happened next. I tried to sleep, but the room felt suffocating. My heart wouldn't slow down, and my thoughts kept returning to that man. My mind raced through a dozen possible explanations, but none of them made sense. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft knock on my door. I lay still for a moment, frozen. I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock came again, softer this time, almost like it was testing the door. I slowly got up, my limbs heavy, and approached the door. I peered through the peephole. There was no one there. I opened the door just slightly, heart hammering in my chest, and looked down the hallway. It was empty, just the faint glow of the flickering hallway light. But then I saw it, the same figure, the man from earlier. He was standing at the far end of the hall, just like before, only this time he was facing my door, his hands hanging limply by his sides. I stepped back into my room, trembling. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away slowly. My breath came in shallow gasps, panic surging through me. What was going on? Why was he here again? The strangest part? When I went to the front desk the next morning, the receptionist seemed confused when I asked if she had seen anyone strange wandering around. "No," she said, furrowing her brow. "There's no one else staying here, just you and a few others. But everyone else has been in their rooms for hours." I was certain I had seen him. I had spoken to him. I had heard him. But when I mentioned the man in the hallway, no one remembered him. I left that hotel as soon as I could, and to this day, I can't explain what happened. Who was he? Why was he there? And how could no one else remember him? I've had never been able to shake the feeling that he was never meant to be in that hotel. Maybe he was never meant to be anywhere at all. I heard the footsteps long before I saw her. But when I confronted the housekeeper, she swore no one had entered my room all day. It was supposed to be a short, uneventful stay at a mid-range hotel in the city. I had been traveling for business and was looking forward to a quiet night to rest before an important meeting the next day. The hotel wasn't anything fancy, but it had decent reviews online. The room was clean, and the bed was comfortable enough, nothing out of the ordinary. But something felt off. It started around 3 p.m. that afternoon. I had just returned to my room after a quick trip to the local coffee shop, hoping to relax before I needed to prepare for my meeting. As I opened the door, I noticed that the room seemed strangely different. Not cleaner, but like someone had been there. The faint smell of cleaning supplies lingered in the air, something like bleach and fresh linen. I shrugged it off. Maybe the housekeeper had come in while I was out. After all, hotels do that, right? But then I noticed something else. The stack of towels by the bathroom door had been moved. I distinctly remembered placing them neatly on the counter when I first arrived, but now they were haphazardly piled, as though someone had touched them, moved them around. My first instinct was to call the front desk, but before I could reach for my phone, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate steps. Someone walking just outside my door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The hotel was practically empty. I hadn't seen anyone in the hall since I arrived. I waited a few seconds before I opened the door, but the hallway was empty. I stepped out cautiously, glancing both ways. Nothing. Puzzled, I closed the door behind me and turned back into the room. But then I heard it again, this time closer. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, as if someone was walking around in my room. I stood still, listening. The noise was coming from the bathroom, just a few feet away. I felt a cold chill run through me. No one had entered my room, at least not as far as I could tell. I was sure of it. The lock had been bolted, and I hadn't seen anyone pass by. I slowly walked toward the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. The cleaning supplies, the bottles of soap, the spray canisters, the cloths, everything was arranged in a perfect line across the counter, as if someone had meticulously placed them there. But I had never touched them. I hadn't used them at all. I backed away from the bathroom, my mind racing. What was going on? That's when I decided I had to confront the housekeeper. I called down to the front desk and asked for her to come up. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she stood, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a worn expression. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but professional. "I'm not sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I noticed that some of the cleaning supplies in my room had been moved, and I heard footsteps earlier, like someone was walking around in here. She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but no one has entered your room today. We've had no housekeeping requests for this room, and the room was cleaned before your arrival." I stared at her, incredulous. "But I can hear it, footsteps, movement. The cleaning supplies, everything is different." The housekeeper's face remained calm, but I could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Sir, I promise, no one has been in your room." "Perhaps it was someone from a different room?" I shook my head. "No, I would have heard them. And I'm sure these things weren't like this when I left earlier." She hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder as if unsure of what to say. Then, without another word, she turned and left. The air felt heavier after she left, and the silence in the room was almost suffocating. I felt my pulse quicken, a growing sense of unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. I spent the next hour pacing around the room, listening for any signs of movement, but the room was eerily quiet. I finally decided to lock the door, pull the curtains shut, and try to sleep, though every fiber of my being screamed that I shouldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still there. When I woke up the next morning, I was still exhausted, my mind foggy from the lack of sleep. But as I dragged myself out of bed, something caught my eye. The cleaning supplies again were perfectly arranged. The towels, the bottles of soap, the cloths all lined up neatly on the bathroom counter. But no one had come in. I grabbed my things, not bothering to check out with the front desk. I was done. I couldn't stay in that room a minute longer. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it some sort of trick of the mind? A malfunctioning sensor? Or maybe my mind playing tricks on me from exhaustion? Or was there something or someone lurking in that room? I'll never know for sure. But I've never stayed in that hotel again. And I don't plan to. The door wouldn't open. No matter how many times I turned the handle, twisted the knob, it always led back to the same room. I had been driving for hours and was desperate to get some rest. The hotel I stumbled upon was a small, unassuming place on the edge of town. It had a faded sign, a kind you'd barely notice unless you were looking for it. The Crescent Inn, it read in chipped paint. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and old carpet, and the receptionist, a young woman with a bored expression, handed me the key without a word. Room 404. I didn't think much of it. I had stayed in worse places. I just needed to sleep. The room itself was fine, nothing special. A basic bed, a couple of chairs, a small desk. The walls were painted in a drab shade of beige, and the faint hum of an air conditioning unit filled the silence. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the bed, still in my travel clothes. I checked my phone briefly, no missed calls, no messages. It was 9 p.m., the perfect time to sleep. I had a busy day ahead, and all I wanted was to rest. But as I lay there, eyes drifting shut, something felt wrong. The room was too still. I couldn't put my finger on it. There were no sounds, no cars passing outside, no distant voices from other rooms. Just silence, heavy silence. It gnawed at my nerves. I sat up and looked around, hoping to shake the feeling that had settled over me. The door. I don't know why, but I got up and walked over to the door. I reached for the handle, half expecting something to be wrong, but I shook off the thought and pulled it open. The hallway outside was empty, just a dimly lit stretch of beige walls and carpet. No one was in sight. I stepped into the hallway and hesitated for a moment. Nothing had changed, but I still felt that strange unease. I glanced up and down the corridor, then turned back into the room. I closed the door behind me. That's when I realized something had changed. The door was locked. I know I had unlocked it before. I remember it clearly. But when I tried to turn the handle again, it wouldn't budge. The lock clicked into place, as if it had been locked from the inside. I tried again. Nothing. A sudden panic gripped me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I twisted the handle over and over, desperately trying to get out. But no matter how hard I pulled, the door stayed shut. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening for any sounds. Nothing, just the silence. I stepped back, staring at the door. There was no other way out. No windows, no balcony, just the same beige walls surrounding me. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand and dialed the front desk, trying to stay calm. "Hello?" The receptionist's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm in room 404. The door won't open." "It's stuck or something," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Can you help me?" There was a long pause. "Room 404? She repeated, almost as if she were confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no room 404 in this hotel." I froze. "What do you mean there's no room 404? "I'm in it right now." "I can see all our room numbers here, sir," she said, her voice strangely distant. "And there's no room 404. We only have up to room 402. I hung up without another word. My mind was racing, spinning in confusion and fear. The panic started to rise in my chest. I rushed back to the door, turning the handle again. Still nothing. I stepped back and looked around the room. No windows, no fire escape, nothing that could explain what was happening. I was trapped. I turned to the walls, feeling a growing sense of dread creeping through me. I started pacing around the room, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't think clearly. I tried the door again. Nothing. I ran my hands across the walls, searching for a hidden latch or mechanism, but found nothing. As I approached the door again, I heard something. A soft tapping. I froze, listening intently. It was faint at first, just a barely perceptible noise. But then it grew louder, like someone was knocking on the door from the outside. I moved toward it, my breath shallow, and pressed my ear against the wood. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by the sound of something dragging slowly across the floor. I stepped back in shock, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I keep trying to open the door? Should I scream for help? But as I stood there, I realized something even more terrifying. The room was changing. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but the air felt heavier, colder. The walls seemed to close in, and I could almost hear a low, growling sound in the distance. The lights flickered once, then twice, before going completely dark. I fumbled for the light switch, but when I pressed it, nothing happened. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I felt a cold, unsettling presence in the room. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, paralyzed with fear. But when the lights flickered back on, I was still in the same room, still trapped. The door was still locked, and there was no way out. I haven't left that room. I don't know if I ever will. I saw my reflection move without me, and whatever was in the mirror was trying to tell me something. I had booked a weekend getaway to a small, historic hotel on the outskirts of town, hoping for some peace and quiet. The place, though old, had a certain charm to it. The walls were adorned with vintage portraits, and the smell of wood and old furniture filled the air. The lobby was empty except for the elderly receptionist, who handed me the key to room 215 with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Room 215 seemed harmless enough. The bed was creaky, the carpet a little worn, but nothing that screamed haunted. I unpacked, set my things down, and took a long, hot shower to relax. But when I stepped out of the bathroom and into the room, something caught my eye. The mirror. It hung on the wall across from the bed, an old-fashioned piece with a dark wooden frame. At first, it looked like just another antique decoration. But when I passed by it on my way to the window, I noticed something strange. My reflection didn't move in sync with me. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the mirror. My reflection was still, its face almost too calm, while I had just taken a step toward the window. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light. I turned back to the mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something wrong about it. I moved my hand, and sure enough, the reflection lagged behind me. But then it did something I didn't. The reflection in the mirror shifted. It tilted its head, almost as if looking at something behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I spun around quickly, but the room was empty. The air felt colder now, heavier. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection was still staring in the same direction, its expression twisted in a way that wasn't mine. It didn't look right. My reflection's eyes seemed to lock with mine, a look of fear, almost pleading. And then it did something else. It raised a finger to its lips, miming a gesture to be quiet. I felt my heart pound in my chest as I glanced around the room again, expecting someone to be there. But again, nothing. No one. The silence was deafening. I took a step closer to the mirror, my hands trembling. What the hell is happening? I whispered to myself. I leaned in closer, my face inches from the glass. And then, just as I was about to back away, the reflection jerked its head toward the corner of the room. Its eyes widened, and it mouthed something silently. The reflection was trying to tell me something. But what? I backed away from the mirror, shaking my head. This isn't real, I muttered. But the feeling of dread creeping up my spine said otherwise. I tried to turn away, but I couldn't. My gaze was locked on my reflection, which had now shifted to a wide-eyed panic. The thing in the mirror seemed to be pleading with me. Its movements were frantic now, mouthing words I couldn't hear, its hand reaching toward me as if trying to warn me. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from behind me, like something moving in the shadows. The room felt colder, the air thick with an unnatural chill. I spun around, expecting to find the source of the sound, but once again, the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror. The reflection was gone. I rushed to the window, but there was nothing outside. No shadows, no figures lurking in the distance. Just the dim glow of streetlights far below. I turned back to the room, but as soon as I did, I felt the air change. It was suffocating. I glanced at the mirror again. This time, my reflection was smiling, grinning at me. A wide, unnerving grin that didn't belong to me. It was a twisted, cruel smile. I stumbled back, heart racing, the cold sweat on my skin now making me shiver violently. But that wasn't the worst part. In the corner of the reflection, I saw it. A figure, a shadow, moving slowly out of the darkness, coming from the corner of the room where my reflection had been pointing earlier. It was tall, and the outline was blurry at first, but as it came closer, I could make out the shape of a person. A figure with hollow eyes and an unnerving presence. It stepped closer, closer still, until it loomed in the reflection, its form solidifying. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen. The figure's eyes locked onto me, into my very soul, and I felt my body tingle with pure, unadulterated fear. And then, the reflection of myself, no longer smiling, looked away from the figure, as if in resignation. I grabbed my bag, rushed out of the room, and slammed the door behind me. I didn't care if I didn't have my things. I just needed to get out. The receptionist was still sitting there, her eyes vacant as I approached. "I need another room," I said quickly. "A different one, please." She barely looked up. "There's only one room available," she replied, but her voice had an eerie, monotone quality that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I never went back to room 215, and to this day, I haven't stayed in another hotel with a mirror that size. Because whatever was trying to warn me in that reflection, it wasn't just a trick of the light, it was real. We never should have booked that room. But the last-minute reservation at the isolated hotel seemed like the only option, and now I wish we had never gone. It started as a spontaneous decision, a last-minute getaway to escape the grind of everyday life. My friends and I had been planning to spend the weekend in the mountains, but after our original plans fell through, we found ourselves scrambling to find a place to stay. We stumbled upon an old hotel nestled in a quiet, remote area. The reviews were sparse, but the price was right, and we were desperate for somewhere to stay. The hotel looked charming from the photos' wooden exterior, rustic decor, and surrounded by dense woods. Perfect for a weekend escape. We didn't think twice when we reserved the last available room 13. When we arrived at the hotel, the air was thick with an eerie calm. The receptionist was an older woman with a frail voice, her hands shaking as she handed over the key. "Room 13, she muttered, almost apologetically. It's the only one available." We chuckled nervously at her odd tone, thinking she was just being superstitious. Who believed in that kind of thing anyway? She didn't even look up as she handed us the key, and we left her behind, dragging our luggage down the creaky hallway. The room itself was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows, blocking out most of the light. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper, and the air smelled old like dust and something metallic. At first glance, it looked fine, but something about it felt off. The first night, nothing happened. We laughed, joked around, and explored the hotel a bit. It was mostly empty, just us and a couple of other guests who stayed out of sight. We figured the place was just isolated, not really a bustling hotspot. But when we went to sleep, that's when things began to feel strange. I woke up in the middle of the night, a sudden sense of unease crawling up my spine. The room felt colder, and I heard faint noises, scratching sounds, like nails against wood. I brushed it off as the wind or an old building settling. But then I heard it again, a soft whisper, just barely audible. "Get out!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but the room felt suffocating now. I turned to look at my friends, but they were all sound asleep, their breathing steady. I sat up, listening. The whispers had stopped, but there was an undeniable presence in the room. Now, something was there. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination and pulled the blankets tighter around me. The next morning, we decided to explore the area around the hotel. We were all excited to get some fresh air and take a walk through the nearby woods. But the moment we returned, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The receptionist wasn't at her desk. Instead, there was a different woman, someone younger, who greeted us with a polite smile. I asked about the woman we had spoken to the previous night, but the young receptionist seemed confused. "There's no one else here but me, sir," she said, glancing at me strangely. "No one else has worked here in years." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. "I guess I'm just mistaken," I said, trying to force a smile. But deep down, something didn't sit right. That night, as we gathered in the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air was colder, the room darker. We tried to ignore it, but the whispers began again, louder this time. "Leave now." I stood up abruptly, panic rising in my chest. My friends were awake now, looking at me in confusion. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. They shook their heads, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Something wasn't right. I decided to call the front desk. As I picked up the phone, I hesitated, thinking back to the woman from earlier, the one who had been so strange. I dialed the number, and after a few moments, I heard a click. "Hello?" It was the same voice. The voice from the first night. "I need help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something wrong with this room. Please, can you help us?" There was a long pause on the other end, and then the voice replied, "You shouldn't be in room 13. I froze, the words hanging in the air. "What do you mean? What's wrong with it?" The voice on the other end was quiet now, almost a whisper. "Room 13 is where the tragedy happened. You shouldn't be there. Leave before it's too late." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I quickly turned to my friends, telling them what I'd heard. They were just as freaked out as I was. But when we looked around the room again, everything seemed so normal. Almost too normal. That night, we decided to leave. We packed up quickly and rushed to the front desk, hoping to check out and leave that place behind us. When we got there, the young receptionist was still there, looking at us with a blank expression. I asked her if we could leave, but she simply smiled and handed me the bill. I glanced at the total room 13. No charge. I looked up, confused. "But she interrupted. "You didn't stay the night. You checked in, but you never left." We left the hotel, shaking, and never looked back. But even now, I can still hear those whispers faintly, as if they're calling me back to that room 13. When I woke up in that hotel room, everything seemed normal until I opened the wardrobe and saw clothes from another time, and the photos on the wall staring back at me, ones that weren't supposed to be there. I had been driving for hours, exhausted and ready to collapse into a bed. When I finally spotted the old hotel on the outskirts of town, it seemed like a godsend. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find in an old movie hall, with a classic sign hanging above the entrance and a worn but welcoming charm about it. The lobby was dimly lit, and the receptionist, an older man with graying hair and tired eyes, greeted me with a tired smile. He handed me the key to room 312, telling me, "It's a quiet place to rest, miss. You'll be fine." I didn't think much of it. The building had that aged, nostalgic look, but nothing out of the ordinary. I took the key, thanked the man, and made my way upstairs to the room. Room 312 was spacious, though the furniture looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. There was an old, creaky bed, a wooden wardrobe with intricate carvings, and a small desk covered in dust. A thick, old carpet muffled the sound of my footsteps as I explored the space. The bed looked inviting, and I was so tired that I didn't hesitate. I lay down and closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion take over. When I woke up, it was still dark outside, and for a moment, I thought I had only been asleep for a few minutes. But something felt off. The air in the room was heavier, colder than when I'd first arrived. I glanced at the clock, 2:37 a.m. It was too early to be up, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping over me. I decided to get up and stretch my legs. As I walked across the room, I couldn't help but notice something strange. The wardrobe doors were slightly ajar. I was certain I hadn't opened them when I first arrived. I walked over and opened the doors fully, only to be met with a sight that made my heart skip a beat. There, hanging neatly on the rack, were old clothes. A woman's dress, a men's suit, and what looked like a child's worn-out coat. They were dated, old-fashioned. The fabric was frayed, and the colors were faded in a way that no modern clothes would be. I stepped back, confused. Why would these clothes be in my wardrobe? Had they been left by a previous guest? But what truly unsettled me wasn't the clothes, it was the photographs. I turned around, my eyes scanning the room, and that's when I saw them. On the walls, there were photographs, scattered haphazardly, some in frames and some not. At first, I assumed they were just old photographs of the hotel, maybe guests who had stayed here in the past. But as I took a closer look, my blood ran cold. There, staring back at me, was a photo of a woman who looked exactly like me, only she was wearing the same old-fashioned clothes that had been hanging in the wardrobe. And beside her, there was a man who looked almost identical to the man at the front desk, only younger. They stood together in front of the hotel, smiling. But that wasn't what made me freeze. In the background of the photograph, I saw something I couldn't ignore. A child. A little girl, standing just behind the couple, her face almost hidden in the shadows, but I could tell it was my face. My hands began to tremble as I pulled the frame off the wall to get a better look. The date on the photo was written in a faded ink, 1957. That wasn't possible. I had just checked in that afternoon, and no one had said anything about old photographs. And how could there be a photo of me from 1957 in this hotel? I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a chair as panic flooded my body. I tried to steady myself, but my head was spinning. This had to be a mistake, some kind of strange coincidence. I turned to the next photo, my breath catching in my throat. The woman in the photo was wearing the same dress from the wardrobe. She stood in the same spot where I was now, smiling, with the same man beside her. But there was something darker about this one. The shadows in the room seemed deeper, the smiles too wide. I couldn't breathe. I had to leave. I turned and yanked open the door to the hallway, but as I stepped into the hallway, I stopped. The old man from the front desk was standing there, just a few feet away. He was staring directly at me, his face pale, his expression unreadable. "Is everything all right, miss?" he asked, his voice sounding strained. I swallowed, my voice barely a whisper. I need to leave." He nodded slowly, and then he looked down at the key I was still holding tightly in my hand. "Room 312, he said softly. "It's always been room 312, hasn't it?" I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the stairs without another word. I didn't stay another moment. I grabbed my bag, slammed the door behind me, and ran out of the hotel, not stopping until I was outside, in the cold night air. I didn't see the man again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something I couldn't explain. The photos, the clothes, my reflection in them, it was all too much. I still don't know what happened in that hotel room, but I never went back, and I never will. The woman, the child, the man, all strangers to me, yet somehow they felt connected. But I'll never forget the photos, especially the one where I was smiling back at myself. The man in the room next door had vanished completely, as if he had never existed at all, and no one at the hotel seemed to remember him. It started like any other night at the luxury hotel. I had been traveling for work and was grateful for the quiet, upscale comfort the place offered. The hotel was beautiful polished marble floors, a grand chandelier hanging in the lobby, and plush, inviting rooms with sweeping views at the city. I had checked in just after 6 p.m., tired from the long drive, and was ready to unwind. My room, 407, was everything I expected. The bed was large and inviting. The windows let in the soft light of the city, and everything in the room had that faint, expensive smell of luxury hotels, fresh linens, and polished wood. I quickly unpacked and settled in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was a little off. It wasn't the room. It wasn't the hotel. It was the feeling that there was something just beneath the surface, something quietly wrong. I brushed it aside and went to the bar for a drink to ease the tension. As I sat down at the bar, I noticed a man sitting alone a few stools down. He was mid-40s, well-dressed, but something about him felt unsettling. He was staring blankly ahead, his drink untouched. He looked out of place. I glanced at him a few times as I waited for my drink, but he didn't seem to notice. I turned back to my drink, dismissing the man as someone lost in his thoughts. But when I looked up again, he was gone, just like that. He hadn't finished his drink. He hadn't moved, but he was no longer there. I thought it was strange, but I didn't dwell on it. The night wore on, and I eventually made my way back to my room. It was only when I was about to settle into bed that I noticed something odd. The door to room 406, the room next to mine, was slightly ajar. It was dark inside. I could just make out the edge of the furniture, but there was no sound, no movement. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to knock or just mind my business. I decided to leave it alone and went back to my bed. Around midnight, I was awoken by a soft sound of tapping, almost like someone knocking on the door, but it wasn't rhythmic, more like a light scratching noise. I sat up, confused and groggy, and checked the time, 12:07 a.m. The knocking continued, and I hesitated, trying to decide if I should answer. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. A moment later, I heard another faint sound, this time coming from the direction of room 406. The door was still ajar, but the hallway was eerily quiet now. I got out of bed, heart racing a little, and decided to check on it. When I stepped into the hallway, the hotel was still and dark. The lights were low, and the distant hum of the city below seeped through the walls. I reached for the doorknob of room 406. It was open, just a crack. I pushed the door open slightly and called out, "Hello? Is everything all right?" There was no response. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of the bed, the desk, and the faint outline of the bathroom door. Everything seemed untouched. I stepped further in, feeling a sense of dread creeping up on me. As I moved into the room, I noticed something strange. The bed had been made, but the room felt empty. The air was colder than it should have been, and as I looked around, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The man I had seen earlier wasn't there. I couldn't find a sign of him. Confused, I stepped back into the hallway, closing the door gently behind me. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling and went back to my room. The next morning, I woke up early, still shaken from the night before. I decided to check out and leave the hotel, but as I passed by the front desk, I was taken aback by what I heard. Room 406, you said. The receptionist was on the phone, speaking with an odd urgency. I overheard her say, "There's no guest listed for that room. No reservation. No record of anyone ever staying there." I stood there, frozen. She hung up and looked at me, noticing my confusion. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" "Room 406, I said, my voice shaking. "I was in that room last night. The door was ajar, and I heard sounds. Who stayed in there?" She blinked, clearly not understanding. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no guest in room 406. That room is vacant. It's been vacant for weeks." I stared at her. "But I saw a man in there. He was there last night. I saw him in the hallway. He checked in with me, didn't he?" The receptionist shook her head, looking even more confused. "Sir, no one has been staying in room 406. Not last night, and certainly not recently. There's no record of anyone in that room. There never has been." My mind raced. How could that be? I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I turned away from the desk and walked back toward the elevators, feeling the weight of a growing dread settle over me. But when I passed the hallway where room 406 stood, I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. The door was now completely closed, the room locked, and everything looked as if it had been untouched for years. I didn't ask any more questions. I left the hotel immediately, but I still can't explain what happened that night. Who was the man? Why was there no record of him? And why did he disappear without a trace? Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint tapping, the scratching noise coming from room 406. But when I look back, there's nothing. Just the emptiness of the hall. The knock at the door was soft, but when I opened it, there was no one there, just an empty tray and a note. I had been traveling for work and checked into a luxury hotel on the outskirts of the city. It was one of those places that had an almost eerie perfection to it, quiet halls, polished floors, and everything exactly where it should be. The kind of place that feels too perfect, like you're being watched. But I didn't let that stop me. It was late, and I was exhausted after a long day of meetings. I had ordered room service to avoid dealing with the crowded restaurant. A quick meal, a warm bed, and some peace and quiet, that was all I wanted. Around midnight, I started feeling hungry again, despite the meal I'd had earlier. The day had been long, and I needed to unwind. So I called the front desk and placed an order for a small snack. They promised it would be delivered within 20 minutes. I sat back on the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The hotel was so quiet, too quiet. No sounds of laughter, no chatter from other rooms. The silence was suffocating. I had almost drifted off when I heard the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible, just a soft tap on the door. I glanced at the clock. 12:25 a.m. I got up, slightly irritated that it had been longer than I expected, but not enough to worry. I opened the door, expecting the waiter with my food, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty, no one in sight. I stood there for a moment, confused, and then I looked down at the floor, and my stomach twisted. There was a tray sitting in front of my door. It was covered with a silver lid, and a folded napkin lay on top. But there was no waiter, no sign of anyone having been there. The hallway was as quiet and empty as before. I bent down to pick up the tray, and my fingers brushed the metal surface. It was strangely cold, colder than it should have been. The warmth from the food was completely gone. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I opened the lid, expecting to see the meal I had ordered. But instead of food, there was a note. My heart stopped. The note was written in a spidery hand, the ink smeared in places as if it had been hastily scrawled. The words read, "You shouldn't be here." I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I stood frozen, staring at the note, feeling my blood run cold. The tray was now strangely empty. No food, no drink, just that note. I glanced down the hallway again, feeling the weight of the silence press in on me. Was this some sort of joke? Some prank? But as I stood there, holding the tray, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The note wasn't just unsettling, it was personal. Whoever had left it knew something about me, knew I didn't belong here. I glanced around the hallway once more, trying to reassure myself. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a mix-up with the room service. But everything in the hotel had seemed too perfect for there to be a mistake. I closed the door, still holding the tray, my mind racing. I set it down on the desk and tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence, a strange prank. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that someone was watching me. I sat at the desk, staring at the tray. The note seemed to burn itself into my mind, its simple message echoing through my thoughts. You shouldn't be here. I tried to brush it off, tried to distract myself with something, anything. I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, but the channels were all static. I clicked through them again, hoping for a distraction, but the screen flickered and buzzed, offering only white noise. I glanced at the clock 1:05 am. Hadn't noticed how much time had passed. The silence in the room seemed to grow deeper. The hotel was still quiet, too quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, as if on cue, the phone in my room rang. The sharp noise sliced through the silence, making me jump. I hesitated before picking it up, almost afraid of what I might hear. Hello? I said, my voice trembling slightly. The line was dead silent for a moment. Then, I heard a voice, a whisper, so faint I had to strain to hear it. You're not alone. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my heart racing. I stared at it, my hand shaking. The line went dead. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning. The room felt colder, and I felt like I was being suffocated by the silence. I grabbed my things and left the room. I couldn't stay there any longer. I went down to the lobby, but when I reached the front desk, the receptionist looked at me as if she didn't know who I was. Is everything all right, sir? She asked. Of course, I said quickly, trying to calm my racing heart. I just had some trouble with the room service. She nodded, but when she looked at the computer screen, she paused. Room 407? She asked. Yes, that's mine, I replied. She looked at me again, her expression changing. There's no record of anyone staying in room 407. I stared at her, stunned. What do you mean? I've been here for hours. I checked in just a few hours ago. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. I'm sorry, sir. The room is showing as empty. I felt a cold wave of panic flood through me. What was happening? Was this some kind of nightmare? I left the hotel without another word, unable to process what had just happened. The empty tray, the note, the phone call, none of it made sense. But the worst part? I'll never be able to explain the feeling that someone had been watching me the entire time.